Big breaking news coming out of the NFL this morning. The Arizona Cardinals defensive lineman and future Hall of Famer J.J. Watt says he'll be retiring at the end of the season. Watt's a three-time Defensive Player of the Year, a five-time All-Pro, and was a 2017 recipient of the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. The accolades go on for days. Watt spent the first 10 years of his career with the Houston Texans, where he's the franchise's all-time leader in sacks, tackles for loss, forced fumbles, and fumble recoveries. Watt made that announcement via Twitter this morning with this note right here. Koa's first ever NFL game, that's his son. My last ever NFL home game. My heart is filled with nothing but love and gratitude. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. You see there J.J. Watt with his family on the sideline following the Chiefs game to the Bucs. Cardinals game. Pete Prisco joins us now. Pete, your initial reaction when you hear this news, he just kind of drops it off via Twitter. We didn't really know that it was coming. Are you surprised?
Well, no, not really. I mean, look, J.J. Watt had an unbelievable career, but his body has been beat up. And I remember way back in the day talking to him before he was even married or even found a wife about him wanting to have a family and be one of those guys that could enjoy life after football. And I think when you get beat up the way he's been beat up in his career, I think once you have a child, and he just recently had a child, I think that changes your perspective, it changes your priority. And so for that reason, am I surprised? No. Am I surprised he announced it now? Yes. But again, when your body gets beat up like that, I think ultimately you look down the road, particularly after you have a child.
Watt, 33 years old, announcing his retirement now, of course, in his second season with the Cardinals. The play on the field for Arizona certainly hasn't gone the way that he would have hoped, especially this year. But what will it be that you remember most about Watt? Because remember, at his best when he was with those Texans, just an absolute force.
He was unblockable. There were times where he was completely unblockable. He had the ability to make offensive linemen embarrass offensive linemen. He was so quick and his technique was outstanding, and he could do things, you weren't supposed to do at times. He would jump around blocks and still be able to come down the line and make plays. He's one of the greatest defensive players who ever played in this league. And for a period of time, like I said, he was unblockable because he was so fast and so quick and so athletic, and he used his hands. He was great at getting around blocks. And I'm telling you, there were times where you watched him on tape and you said, boy, he probably shouldn't be doing that, but he'd jump around a block and make a play. That's how athletic he was. That's how quick he was. And there aren't a lot of guys like him over the course of history who could get away with some of the things he did because he was such a phenomenal athlete and so good with his ability to jump up the field and penetrate the offense.
9.5 sacks for him this season total in his career so far, 111.5 sacks. Where does he rank for you all time amongst pass rushers in the NFL?
Well, it's hard to put him as a pure pass rusher because he played inside, he played outside. He didn't exactly stand up and rush the passer like guys like Lawrence Taylor. But when you talk about down defensive linemen, he's one of the best to ever play the game. You talk about Mean Joe Green and Aaron Donald's now in that conversation. And there's been a lot of really good inside. Alan Page, who was an MVP way back in the day as a defensive player. You talk about the great defensive lineman, but J.J. Watt's right up there with him. You'd like to have seen more of him. Again, the injuries impacted his career greatly. I shudder to think how good his numbers would have been if he didn't get all those injuries. But J.J. Watt, phenomenal player, arguably one of the 5, 6, 7 best inside pass rushers to ever play the game.
Yeah, you mentioned those injuries. Played in just 7 games last season back in 2019, 8 games, 3 in 2016 and 5 in 2017. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer for sure, right?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. People love to put first ballot, they rush to that. But he'll get in, and he should probably get in on the first ballot. But it's hard to say who's ever in that class with him. But there's no doubt he will be getting a bust in Canton. He should be getting a bust in Canton. 3-time Defensive Player of the Year honors. That tells you how special he was as a player. I loved watching him. He was a joy to cover when you were around him. He was a pro's pro from the time he came into the league, and the NFL is worse off by not having guys like J.J. Watt playing football.
Yeah, Walter Payton Man of the Year award winner as well. J.J. Watt announcing his retirement. Pete Prisco, thank you very much for joining on this. On the other side of the break, we'll have Leger Douzable. But first, that announcement coming via Twitter from J.J. Watt. There's a tweet right there. His last ever NFL home game. Heart filled with nothing but love and gratitude. There, spent time with his friends and family out there on the field. J.J. Watt, 33 years old, announcing his retirement. We'll be back on the other side with a lot more on the career of J.J. Watt coming to a close after the season. Arizona Cardinals defensive lineman and future Hall of Famer J.J. Watt says he will retire at the end of the season. Watt is a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, a 5-time All-Pro, and was a 2017 recipient of the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. Watt spent the first 10 years of his career with the Houston Texans, where he's the franchise's all-time leader in sacks, tackles for loss, forced fumbles, and fumble recoveries. Watt made that announcement via Twitter just a few moments ago. We'll show you that tweet right here. Koa's first ever NFL game, that's his newly born son. My last ever NFL home game. My heart is filled with nothing but love and gratitude. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. J.J. Watt announcing his retirement. A pleasure to see him out on the football field. One guy we have that has some experience with seeing him out on the football field is Leger Douzable. He's joining us now. Leger, you're on the defensive line. You've been able to play at the same time frame when J.J. Watt did. When you see a contemporary like him, what was so special about the way he was able to play the game?
I mean, J.J. Watt was just pure dominance. He literally ran the AFC South for, I would say, a 5 to 7 year stretch where he was unblockable. You talked about it, right, Zach? 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, 5-time five-time All-Pro guy. And as a guy that has over 110 sacks. So this guy was just dominant. And the thing about J.J. Watt was the versatility. He didn't just play on the edge, right? They slid him inside. He was one of those guys where if you look at him against the run, right, a lot of guys would get in trouble for backdooring certain blocks. But this is a guy that understood blocking schemes, knew how guys were trying to attack him. He was able to run around blocks and make plays in the backfield. You see it time and time again. They used to run the ball opposite of J.J. Watt for that reason, and he would still make tackles for loss. So this was a guy that was just pure dominant in the NFL, especially in the AFC South when he was with the Houston Texans. And we've seen glimmers of that this year, right? We saw, 2 weeks ago versus the Denver Broncos. He had 3 sacks in that game and was dominant in that game. So this is a guy that will go down as one of the most versatile defensive linemen in the game and one of the best defensive linemen to ever strap it up in the NFL.
Yeah, more healthy this year than he was last year. 9.5 sacks already this season with Arizona. You talked about that versatility for him to be able to play inside and outside. For those who weren't in the trenches playing football, just how rare and how good of a feat is that to be able to excel both inside and outside?
Yeah, the funny thing is, when you look back at his draft class, I believe it was 2011, there was a lull between 4-3 and 3-4 defensive linemen, right? The traditional 4-3 guys, you had the defensive ends and the defensive tackles. But then you started seeing teams like the Dallas Cowboys, the Houston Texans. They implemented that 3-4 system, and it was perfect for guys like me and J.J. Watt, guys that were tweeners, guys that you maybe thought weren't fast enough to play on the edge, but then, maybe not big enough and stout enough to play inside. Well, guys like us were able to make a long career in the NFL, being able to be those tweener guys and move up and down the line of scrimmage. And it's also a chess piece if you're a defensive coordinator, because they used to line J.J. Watt up and down the line of scrimmage. Whoever the weak link was on the offensive line, that's where J.J. Watt was lining up, and that showed you the versatility. Again, one of the most versatile defensive linemen to come out in the NFL, and he really put a precipice and an onus on teams looking at defensive linemen different, saying we can move a guy up and down the line of scrimmage. You look at guys like Chris Jones, Muhammad Wilkerson. These were guys that were built in the same image of J.J. Watt. And now even Aaron Donald is a guy who's traditionally in a 4-3, but the last few years, they've moved him up and down the line of scrimmage. So J.J. Watt was a big proponent of that. It had been a lot of years before we've seen a guy that was able to dominate not just on the outside, but on the inside as well. So what he did showed his versatility, and also it was almost like a blueprint of what other defensive coordinators could do with different defensive linemen in the NFL.
You came into the league 2 years before JJ, but was there anything or ever a time maybe that you remember seeing something that he did, either going up against him, that made you feel like, okay, let me try to add that to my bag of tricks?
I mean, the way he, again, knew how to attack different running schemes, right? Because it's a cardinal sin as a defensive lineman to backdoor blocks. But if you have the athletic ability to backdoor block and get flat down the line of scrimmage while still capturing your gap, then if you make the play, how the coach always tell me, if you do it, you better make the play. Now, sometimes J.J. Watt didn't, and he used to get creased in the run game, but he would always make those explosive big plays in the backfield when the Houston Texans needed it the most. So when he used to do that, and then when we played him, I believe it was, I want to say 2014 or maybe even 2015 when I was with the New York Jets. I mean, just seeing his dominance in that game, because again, the AFC South for the longest time had kind of been the little brother of the NFL. It was a struggle division, kind of like it is a little bit this year. But when he used to dominate against other teams, that's when you're like, oh, this guy is legit. And I believe he hit us for 2 sacks and a few tackles for loss that game when we played him down in Houston. So again, this guy's versatility was what separated him from most defensive linemen in the NFL.
3-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner. Where does he stack up there when you compare him to other guys who have starred on defense between Lawrence Taylor in the past, Aaron Donald still right now? Where does he figure into that conversation for you?
Well, to me, he goes down as one of the most, if not the most, gifted, versatile defensive lineman. If you're looking at pure 3-4 guys that can move up and down the line of scrimmage, he's one of the top guys there. Now, if you look at it as far as like DeMarcus Ware, Jared Allen, other guys like that, Lawrence Taylor, I don't know if I put him in that realm, but I think he will get in as a Hall of Famer for sure. He should get in as a Hall of Famer. You would just like to have seen him been a little bit more healthy, right? If he could have stayed healthy, I mean, he had over 110 sacks. Who knows what his number would have been, Zach, if he stayed healthy. He really got beat up these last 3 or 4 years playing in the NFL. But just what he did in a stretch of 5 to 7 years, he was probably the most dominant defensive lineman during that span. Again, you talked about his 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, 5-time All-Pro selection at the defensive line position. He will go down to me as one of the best 3-4 defensive ends to ever play the game.
A man who knows a lot about that himself, playing defense, Leger Douzable. Thank you very much for tapping in with us this morning on CBS Sports HQ as J.J. Watt announcing he will retire from the NFL at the end of this season. A look at those numbers, truly outstanding to start his career. 70 and 74.5 sacks in his first 5 seasons coming into the league, almost averaging a sack per game. Didn't miss any time, but in the past 7 seasons, those injury bugs have certainly hit him hard as his production slipped a little bit, but this season still playing well, 9.5 sacks with the Cardinals compared to just 1 sack last season when he had only 7 games played. J.J. Watt retiring after this season, just announced that news via Twitter. Keep it tuned here to CBS Sports HQ. We'll have a lot more on the future Hall of Famer.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.